Hello, BookTube. Believe it or not, I've got another BookTube response video to make. William Gwynne just made a video on a perennial BookTube subject, how to read more. Some of you may know him as one half of the brothers Gwynne. He has a channel with his brother. He also has a channel of his own that he made that's approaching 2,000 subscribers in very little time. Very nice to see. Die-hard reader, and also the son of a die-hard reader, the son of John Gwynne, who is a fantasy author, a really, really talented fantasy author. And last year, in 2022, William Gwynne hit a milestone. He read more than 100 books in 2022, which was a record for him. And reflecting back on how he did that, he came up with a few points on how to do that. I wanted to respond to his points and maybe add a few, because this is a subject that comes up on BookTube. A lot of you are very, very busy, very committed in all sorts of ways, and you're often wondering, you're looking at all of your books and thinking that age-old saying, so many books, so little time, and wondering how maybe you can eke out a few more. So let me go over William Gwynne's points first. And his first point is to avoid making reading a chore. And one of the main ways that he thinks to do that, that is kind of a theme that runs throughout his points, is keep it fresh. Switch things up to keep it fresh. Otherwise, you're asking for it to become dull for you. And one of the ways that he suggests for avoiding reading becoming a kind of chore is to lean into a community aspect. He mentions that, of course, he's lucky enough, I envy him for this, he's lucky enough to come from an intensely bookish community. His father is an avid reader and also a writer. His brother is a reader. They have a channel together. So he comes from that, but he makes a very good point in mentioning that these communities are easier to find than ever, thanks to social media, thanks to the internet. Once upon a time, it would have been a little bit more difficult, but now there are Goodreads groups that would welcome you with open arms on almost any kind of reading or any kind of book. There's BookTube, of course, which large parts of it are quite welcoming to you. You could either become a frequent commenter or make a channel of your own. And I've often urged you all to make a channel of your own. It's a lot of fun, mostly a lot of fun. But all sorts of other things too. All sorts of any other kind of community, any way to talk about books, whether it's book Twitter or Bookstagram or whatever. Any way to do that definitely helps. I've noticed that myself in the last years that I've been on BookTube, is that BookTube legitimately does take an intensely solitary hobby and make it feel a little more communal, and not always in bad ways, often in very good ways. So that was his first pointer, is avoid letting it become a chore by enhancing the community aspect. His second point is to read widely. And this is in conjunction, as he says, this is in conjunction with forestalling one of the reasons that slows people's readings down, which is reading slumps. I myself don't have reading slumps, and I have a feeling that the reason I don't get them is because I am doing what William Gwynne suggests in this point, which is to read widely. You will stand a very good chance of avoiding reading slumps if you read widely. I often look at BookTube channels that just completely concentrate on one kind of thing only. There are fantasy channels that William Gwynne himself loves fantasy, and his father writes fantasy, but there are fantasy channels where you get the strong impression that the booktuber in question never reads anything else. I look at channels like that, I admit, with a kind of envy, because it's such a well marked off patch, but I couldn't live without the variety that I have. And I strongly recommend it as a way to keep reading fresh and also to stave off reading slumps. One type of reading, whether it's murder mysteries, cozy mysteries, religious books, whatever, one type of reading is bound to get in its bones, in its DNA, a bit repetitive, if that's all you read. And the minute you introduce that kind of repetitive, that kind of just an element of roteness, that's when you're inviting yourself not only to think of reading as a chore, but also to develop a reading slump. Keep things up, break things up, change them up, and that will increase the freshness of it, which, as William Gwynne points out, is bound to increase how often you do it. It's in this point that he mentions, sort of offhandedly, that of course no one can read 100 books a month. But I'm not going to take that personally. We're just going to move on to his third point, which he acknowledges in his video. I'll leave a link to his video down below. He acknowledges in his video. In fact, I'll leave a link because it'd be nice if we shot him over 2,000. That would be great. He's very close. He mentions that his next point won't fit with everybody. That that's his nice way of saying that it's an argument starter. Nevertheless, his next point is audiobooks. And again, he's reverting to his overall theme of keep it fresh. Audiobooks are a way to consume a book. That is, if you never listen to them, it is completely different. In fact, he makes some wonderful advice in this part of his video about how if it's a brand new way for you to consume a book, you should take that into account and go a little easy on yourself. Maybe the first audiobook or the first few that you listen to should be books that you know well, so that you can get used to it, so that you can get used to this different delivery system. He also mentions that Audible, the service Audible, which I know a lot of you really love, have samples. They have audio samples, because he makes the good point that when you are, well, he doesn't put it this way, but you know that I will. When you're listening to an audiobook, someone else is in the room. Someone else is in the equation. That's the reason that I don't, is because another person is interpreting the text for you. And that person is the narrator. Now, it could be that doesn't matter to you. And sometimes I've listened to audiobooks and it doesn't matter to me, but never in a critical way. If I'm slotted to read a book because I may be reviewing it, then the audiobook simply won't do. I need to be able to make all of those pacing and intonation decisions myself in order to determine whether or not the author does them well, right? Andy Serkis can fix a lot when he's narrating, and he might do that, and that might make it a better reading experience. But if, for instance, well, Neil Gaiman also is a very engaging audiobook narrator. He narrates all of his own books. There's a way that can fix defects in the book, and I want to see those defects. I might have to report on them. But if you're not doing that, if it's just a question of absorbing books, and maybe a lot of you like to be read to, then it does pay off to use those samples and figure it out. Because even if you like the book, you might not like the narrator. That's another person in the equation. Those are all really good pieces of advice if you want to consume books in audio format. William Gwynne makes the point that you have mindless housework, you have going out for walks, you have dead time when you cannot be reading a book, but when you could be listening to an audiobook. That's absolutely true. It's not true for me. my mindless housework is taken care of by my surly houseboy, and my walks outside are accompanied by my little dog, who is chatting 90 miles a minute the whole time. So I don't use either one of those, but I could see where some of you do. A lot of you probably have that kind of dead time. I imagine that for a lot of you, you would be nodding vigorously when William Gwynne gets to this point in his video. I imagine for a lot of you, audio games have been a game changer. I know a lot of people where they've been a game changer. So when you think, and I also know a lot of people who listen to an audiobook of a book and like it so much that they then want to go and read it. They want to go and read the printed text. I think that's wonderful. I think it's a whole world. It's a whole world that I don't really use, but I think William Gwynne is entirely right that this could add to keeping your reading year fresh, which is great. And then the last point that he makes is, again, he admits it's self-evident. And other channels, other booktubers have made this same point before. It is self-evident, but in our 21st century, a lot of times people don't pay attention to it. They don't give it the importance that it deserves, which is that if you want to read more, you've got to read more. You've got to allot the time for it. William Gwynne suggests making it a routine. And he's a numbers guy. He says this all the time. Gets a fair ration of crap from it, from his brother. He's a numbers guy. And in this video, he crunches the numbers. And I have to admit, I'm not a numbers guy myself, but I have to admit, it's eye-opening. He mentions, for instance, well, if you make a routine out of reading, no matter how busy you are, you can spare 15 minutes a day. I would say that no matter how busy you are, you can spare an hour a day. And I would challenge almost anybody who says that's not true to kindly let me investigate your day. So I don't know if maybe an hour straight, but 15 minutes, certainly you can do. And William Gwynne points out that at 15 minutes a day is 5,460 minutes a year. 91 hours of reading. 91 hours. those 15 minutes add up to. That's amazing. That's absolutely incredible. And it's true, right? Those errant 15 minutes here and there really do add up. And the existence of those 15 minutes has been for me the number one story that I've heard repeated from readers for years now about what won them over to e-reading is that when you have books on a device, if it's a Kindle right at your fingertips, if it's your kid's Kindle, it's right there in the car while you're waiting for them to get done with trombone practice, or more importantly, if it's on your phone, if you've got books on your phone, well, it's right there all the time. So those 15 minutes suddenly waiting in line at the bank or the post office is reading time, whereas your book is home on the nightstand. I've heard that finding those little bits of time and filling them with reading has often been the reason people told me that won them over to e-reading. But even if it's not e-reading, it's still true that those little interstices of time really are there in the day, and as this video makes perfectly clear, they add up. I didn't, of course, no, I would never do the adding up myself, but that's impressive. 91 extra hours of reading. That is a lot. That's a lot of doing nothing but reading. That's a lot. And I mean, William Gwynne he's pitching that low, right? I don't believe there's anyone listening to me who only has 15 minutes to spare in a day. I don't believe that. It might not be an hour. It might not be certainly an uninterrupted hour, but I bet there are a few 15-minute intervals, and that means the number only goes up. It only goes even higher. I think that's wonderful advice. It also, William Gwynne didn't phrase it this way, but it works. It's important to remember that it's little bits and pieces like that. It's baby steps like that anything important gets done. People often think, in fact, I've had people tell me over the decades, yeah, I really want to do a whole lot of reading. Can't wait until I retire. No. It's a routine. Like William Gwynne says, it's a routine. It's a habit. If you haven't built the habit, then in your retirement, I guarantee you it's not going to suddenly appear. Those are his 4 points. Engage with the community, read widely to keep things fresh, constantly fermenting so that you don't fall into a slump. Experiment with audiobooks, see if they really do work for you, and also make this a routine. Make time for reading. I want to stress that last one most of all because it's the thing I find that most people don't do. They opine often that they wish they had more time to read, but they don't make the actual time to read. And that makes the world of difference. That makes a world of difference. To look at your day and realize, well, okay, I say that I wish I had more time for reading, but I've spent the last hour scrolling on my phone to no end whatsoever. And to no end whatsoever. At the end of that process, I feel miserable. I feel dirty on the inside. Whereas an hour of reading would make me feel wonderful. The point here about making it a routine is to take hold of those islands of time and change them to what you want them to be. Simple as that. But I have 2 points that I want to add here. I think his points are wonderful, and I want to add 2 of my own, 2 more tips that may help you to read more. First of all, we want to clear up that first you have to want to read more. There's absolutely nothing wrong with how much you read now if you're happy with it. So his video and this video and all videos like this are aimed at people who want to read more. You don't have to. This is not a race. There's no one's comparing anything here. So if you're happy with how much you read now, then more power to you. But if you want to read more, I have 2 other tips that William Gwynne didn't mention, although I'm pretty sure that he probably does them. The first of those 2 tips would be to engage with what you're reading. He mentions engaging with a reading community, and that is very important, and we have more ability to do that now than we ever have. But I would say also grapple with your book. Question it. Underline. Leave lots and lots of annotations. Maybe keep a reading notebook or a commonplace book to pull out the parts that are really memorable for you. Really engage with it. Take it apart and put it back together. That process, it does make the individual reading of that individual book slower, but it increases your desire to do it so much more, off the charts more, and that desire is what will get the reading done. Will get more reading done, is if you can't wait to do it. And that grappling with the book very much helps to increase that feeling. It's been my experience that it very much helps to increase that feeling. And then the second of my 2 tips, the last tip that I'll end with here, is something I've mentioned on this channel before. It only applies if you want, and it only applies if you want to read more, and that is the subject of subvocalizing. I've had this conversation with a lot of you in private. We've gone over on this subject many, many times in these videos over the years, but quite a few people, I would argue most readers, vocalize what they're reading while they are silently looking at the page. They're sounding out the words in their head. I would argue that probably most readers do that, and it isn't necessary. That doesn't need to be a part of reading at all. It's a long-standing muscle. You learned it as a kid because the first thing you did when you were learning to read was sound out everything out loud. And so it was natural to take that process inside but not get rid of it. But you can get rid of it, and it isn't necessary. If you are only reading with your eyes, and then what you're reading with your eyes is going straight to the decoding part of your brain, but not going through your mouth. I'm not saying you're saying it out loud, but if you're saying the words to yourself, you are running it through a part of your brain that does not need to be involved. And again, you have to want to do this. If you're reading, the way you're reading is making you happy, then that is absolutely fine with me. But universally, people who have subvocalized their whole life and then take the time, it takes time to unlearn a habit you've had for years. It takes time. The people who have subvocalized for years and then unlearn it and stop doing it universally report that their reading speed catapults, doubles, sometimes even triples. That's absolutely true. It takes a long time to say words out loud. Even if you're not saying them out loud, to recite them, to vocalize them in your mind takes a long time. I would argue that the number times 3 is probably accurate. It can make a huge difference. I know that it can. And just imagine I imagine when I think about it, I imagine what it would be like if all the reading that I did all night long was reading that I did out loud. I would get a fraction of what I get done if I did that. That's just simply true, I think. If you remove, you're routing, when you're self-vocalizing, you are routing the reading through a part of your brain that does not need to be involved. That's naturally going to slow things down. And as maddening as it is, a lot of people tell me, okay, I tried to stop self-vocalizing. I realized that I do it, and I tried to stop doing it, and nothing was sticking. I had to keep going back and back to the same paragraph over and over again. And so I don't think it works for me. I want to say it does. What we're talking about here is a deeply ingrained habit, something you've been doing since you were 5. You might want to give it a little time, right? You're not going to see it go away right away, overnight, or in a week, or in 2 weeks. You might want to give it a little time if you're interested in doing that. That is another tip I found that in my life, the 2 tips for how to read more that are most important are William Gwynne's 4th tip and my 2nd tip. You have to make the time for it. The time isn't going to make itself, and you have to make the time for it. If you are spending 2 hours every night playing video games and you end up every night saying, I wish I read more, then don't play video games, or play them far less, and the time will open up. But you have to do that. And for instance, all the booktubers who get a huge amount of reading done, put a huge amount of time into reading. That's true. That's true for all of them. You do that, and your reading will go up. That was William Gwynne's 4th point. That is one of the 2 most important things that I have determined for reading more, is to read more, to rearrange your day, your schedule, your thinking, so that you do more of it. And the other one is not subvocalizing, but that also will definitely increase your reading speed, but only if you want to do it. So there you go. I thought I'd make a BookTube response video because this is an evergreen subject, how to read more. Everybody wants to do it. And these are some really, really good tips that William Gwynne, despite his dewy youth, managed to come up with. So I'll leave a link to his video, and you go and give it a watch. I bet you'll find yourself nodding along. And of course, I'd love to hear from you. I mean, I hear from you a lot as it is, but I'd love to hear from you. If you feel free to email me or leave me a Voxer message or leave a comment here, letting me know what your own state of reading is. Are you happy with it, or would you rather do more? What advice, if you have recently increased your reading speed, what advice worked for you? And is there a piece of advice that neither William Gwynne nor I is mentioning that you have found worked? I'd love to hear it. I'd love to hear it. This is just a great subject. So I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.